The words hit me like ice water at my father's graveside. You're adopted, so you don't count. My half-sister Jessica's voice cut through the September rain as mourners filed past the casket. I stood there in my black dress, clutching a handful of wet tissues, wondering how grief could taste so much like betrayal. 3 hours later, we were all sitting in the mahogany-paneled office of Morrison and Associates, waiting for Dad's will to be read. Jessica sat smugly beside her mother Patricia, my stepmother of 15 years. They kept whispering and glancing at me like I was an unwelcome guest at my own father's funeral. That's when everything I thought I knew about family, love, and belonging got turned upside down. Because sometimes, the people who claim blood is thicker than water forget that love runs deeper than genetics. And sometimes, the dead have ways of speaking louder than the living ever could. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rachel Morrison, and until 3 days ago, I had a father who loved me unconditionally. Or so I thought. Growing up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, I was the kid with pigtails and scraped knees who helped Dad in his auto repair shop every weekend. While other 8-year-olds played video games, I was handing him wrenches and learning the difference between a carburetor and a transmission. Rachel's got grease in her veins, he'd tell customers with pride, ruffling my hair with his oil-stained hands. I never questioned why I looked nothing like him. Dad had sandy brown hair and blue eyes, while mine were dark brown with olive skin that tanned easily in summer. When people asked, he'd just shrug and say, "She got her mother's looks." My biological mother had died when I was 2, or so the story went. Dad rarely talked about her, and I learned not to ask. When I was 12, Dad remarried Patricia Caldwell, a real estate agent with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She brought Jessica into our lives, a 10-year-old princess who treated our house like her personal kingdom. Patricia made it clear from day one that she was doing Dad a favor by accepting his baggage. "It's wonderful that Robert is so devoted to you," she'd say, her voice dripping with fake sweetness whenever Dad wasn't around. Not every man would take on such a responsibility. Jessica was worse. She had inherited her mother's talent for cruelty disguised as concern. "It's so sad you don't have any real family photos," she'd whisper during family gatherings. "I mean, you're in them, but you're not really family, you know?" But Dad never wavered. Every birthday, every school play, every late-night homework session, he was there. When I graduated valedictorian from Cedar Falls High, he was in the front row crying tears of joy. When I got into Northwestern University pre-med, he drove me to campus himself and helped me move into my dorm. "I'm so proud of you, kiddo," he said that day, his voice thick with emotion. "You're gonna change the world." I believed him. I believed in us. I believed that the man who taught me to drive, who scared away my first boyfriend, who called me every Sunday during college, would always be my anchor. But belief is a fragile thing, especially when it's built on secrets. The cancer came fast and brutal. Stage 4 pancreatic, the kind that steals months instead of years. I dropped out of my surgical residency at Chicago General to move back home and take care of him. Patricia acted like I was being dramatic. "He has nurses," she said when I announced my decision. "You don't need to throw away your career." But Dad's eyes lit up when I walked through the front door with my suitcases. "My Rachel's home," he whispered, squeezing my hand with what little strength he had left. Those final 6 months were precious and terrible. I held his hand through chemo sessions, read him mystery novels when he couldn't sleep, and made him laugh with stories from medical school. We talked about everything. His childhood in Minnesota, his dreams of expanding the shop, his regrets about not traveling more. Everything except the truth about who I really was. The funeral was on a Tuesday, gray skies and steady rain, like the heavens were crying too. I gave the eulogy because Jessica refused, and Patricia said she was too emotional. I stood at that podium and talked about a man who fixed broken things for a living but never tried to fix me, because I wasn't broken. After the service, as we stood around the grave, that's when Jessica finally showed her true colors. "It's so sad," she said loudly enough for the remaining mourners to hear, "that Dad wasted so much time and money on someone who wasn't even his real daughter. You're adopted, so you don't count. We all know you were just his charity case." Patricia didn't stop her. She just stood there with that cold smile, like Jessica had finally said what they'd both been thinking for years. I felt something break inside me that had nothing to do with grief. It was the sound of belonging shattering, of 15 years of being told I was imagining their cruelty, of realizing that in their eyes, I had never been family at all. That night, I sat alone in Dad's house, the house I'd grown up in but apparently had no right to, and wondered if Jessica was right. Had I really been nothing more than an obligation? A burden he'd carried out of duty instead of love? The questions gnawed at me like acid, eating away at every precious memory I had of the man who raised me. The law office of Morrison and Associates smelled like old leather and disappointment. I sat in the waiting room the next morning, my hands folded in my lap like a good girl, while Patricia and Jessica whispered and giggled on the other side of the room. "I can't wait to sell that dusty old shop," Jessica said, not bothering to lower her voice. "The land alone is worth $500,000. And the house needs to be gutted," Patricia added. "All that masculine, greasy decor has got to go." I stared at the worn carpet and tried not to think about Dad's hands, always stained with motor oil, gently braiding my hair before school, or the way he'd make pancakes shaped like race cars on Saturday mornings, humming old country songs while he cooked. Mr. Morrison, Dad's longtime attorney, finally called us into his office. He was a kind man in his 70s, with gentle eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd handled Dad's legal affairs for over 20 years. "Before we begin," he said, settling behind his massive oak desk, "I want to express my condolences. Robert was a good man, and he spoke of all of you often." Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "He was such a devoted husband and father. We're just grateful we had the time we did." I wanted to vomit. Mr. Morrison opened a thick manila folder. "Robert's will is fairly straightforward, but there are some unusual provisions. Some of you may find them surprising." Jessica leaned forward eagerly. "Just tell us who gets what." "Well," Mr. Morrison said slowly, "that's where it gets complicated. Robert has left detailed instructions about his wishes, but he also left some letters to be read aloud as part of the legal proceedings." My stomach clenched. Letters? The first letter is addressed to Mrs. Patricia Morrison. Mr. Morrison pulled out a sealed envelope. "Robert asked that this be read aloud in front of all beneficiaries." Patricia's face went pale. Is that really necessary?" "I'm afraid so. These were Robert's explicit instructions." With shaking hands, Mr. Morrison opened the envelope and began to read. "Patricia, by the time you hear this, I'll be gone, and you'll finally be free to show your true colors. For 15 years, I watched you treat my daughter with cold indifference, thinking I didn't notice. I saw every snide comment, every dismissive look, every moment you made her feel like an outsider in her own home. I stayed married to you because I was weak, and because I thought Jessica needed a father figure. But I never forgot that my first loyalty was to Rachel, the little girl who held my hand in the hospital when her mother died, who never asked for anything but my love, who gave me a reason to keep living when I wanted to give up. You never understood that blood doesn't make a family, love does. And Rachel has been my daughter in every way that matters since the day I adopted her 25 years ago." The room fell silent except for the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Adopted. 25 years ago. But I was 27 years old. Mr. Morrison continued reading. "You see, Patricia, there's something Rachel doesn't know, something I should have told her years ago but was too afraid to say. Rachel isn't just my adopted daughter. She's my biological daughter." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the arms of my chair so hard my knuckles went white. Her mother, Sarah Morrison, was my first wife. We married young, and when Rachel was born, Sarah and I were the happiest people on earth. But Sarah got sick. Postpartum depression that turned into something darker. She became convinced that Rachel wasn't safe with us, that we were going to hurt her somehow. One night, when Rachel was just 2 months old, Sarah took her and disappeared. I searched for them for 2 years, hiring private investigators, posting missing person reports, checking every hospital and shelter in 3 states. I was going crazy with grief and fear. Then I got the call. Sarah had been found dead in a car accident in Nebraska. Rachel was with her, unharmed but dehydrated, and had been placed in emergency foster care. It took me 6 more months to navigate the legal system and prove she was my daughter, but by then, the state required me to go through formal adoption proceedings because of the circumstances. So yes, Rachel is adopted, but she's adopted by her own father who spent 2 years of his life searching for her and would have searched until his dying breath. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, and I could hear Patricia and Jessica arguing with Mr. Morrison, but their voices sounded like they were coming from underwater. My mother hadn't died when I was 2. She'd taken me away from Dad when I was a baby, and he'd fought to get me back. All those years of feeling different, of wondering why I didn't look like him, of listening to Jessica's cruel comments about not being real family, and I had been his daughter all along. The second letter, Mr. Morrison continued, his voice cutting through my shock, is addressed to Jessica. Jessica straightened up, probably expecting some sentimental goodbye. Jessica, I tried to be a good stepfather to you, but you made it clear from the beginning that you resented Rachel's place in my heart. You inherited your mother's talent for cruelty, and you used it to try to make my daughter feel like she didn't belong in her own home. I had hoped you would grow out of it, that you would learn to see Rachel as the sister she could have been to you. Instead, you doubled down on your petty jealousies and mean-spirited comments. At my own funeral, you couldn't even pretend to grieve without finding a way to hurt the one person who loved me unconditionally. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I know what you said to her at my graveside, Jessica. I know because I've been listening to you say things like that for 15 years, and I'm done pretending it doesn't matter. Jessica's face had gone from smug to terrified. How could he possibly know what I said? He was dead. Mr. Morrison ignored her outburst and continued reading. Which brings me to the actual provisions of my will. To my wife Patricia, Mr. Morrison read, his voice steady despite the tension crackling in the room. I leave our joint savings account, currently containing approximately $47,000, in your personal belongings. The house, the shop, and all other assets are not included in this bequest. Patricia shot up from her chair. That's impossible. I'm his wife. I have rights. Ma'am, please let me finish, Mr. Morrison said calmly. To Jessica, I leave your college fund, which I have faithfully contributed to for 15 years, totaling $85,000. I also leave you my 1967 Mustang, which you always admired. Jessica looked confused. But what about everything else? The house, the business, belongs to Rachel, Mr. Morrison finished. The house, Morrison's auto repair, all business assets, equipment, customer accounts, and the life insurance policy totaling $300,000. Everything goes to my daughter, Rachel Morrison. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there, stunned, as reality sank in. Dad hadn't just left me his money, he'd left me his entire world. The shop where I'd learned to love the smell of motor oil, and the satisfaction of fixing something broken. The house where he'd tucked me in every night, where we'd built blanket forts in the living room and had serious conversations about boys on the front porch. But more than that, he'd left me the truth. 27 years of wondering who I really was, and it turned out I was exactly who I'd always believed myself to be, Robert Morrison's daughter. Patricia was ranting now, something about legal challenges and undue influence, but Mr. Morrison cut her off with a raised hand. There's one more letter, he said quietly. This one is for Rachel. With trembling fingers, I took the envelope he handed me. My name was written on the front in Dad's careful handwriting, the same handwriting that had signed permission slips and birthday cards and Christmas presents for 25 years. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. My dearest Rachel, I read aloud, my voice barely above a whisper. If you're hearing this, then you know the truth about your mother and about how you came to be with me. I'm sorry I never told you while I was alive. I was afraid that knowing about Sarah's illness would make you doubt yourself, would make you wonder if you inherited something broken from her. But you didn't inherit her sickness, sweetheart. You inherited her beautiful eyes and her stubborn streak and her fierce intelligence. You inherited the best parts of both of us, and you became something neither of us could have imagined. A woman strong enough to give up her dreams to take care of her old man, compassionate enough to forgive me for keeping secrets, and brave enough to build a life that makes me proud every single day. The key is to the safety deposit box at First National, box 247. Inside, you'll find some things that belong to your mother. Photos, letters, her jewelry. I saved them for you, hoping that someday I'd be brave enough to share them. I'm sorry I ran out of time. You'll also find the deed to the land where the shop sits, and some other documents you'll need. But most importantly, you'll find a letter I wrote to you when you were 5 years old, after your first day of kindergarten. You came home crying because a boy in your class said you looked different from me, and you asked me if I was really your dad. I wrote down everything I felt that day, everything I wanted you to know about how much you meant to me. I kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment to give it to you. I guess this is it. Rachel, you are my daughter in every way that matters. You are my legacy, my greatest accomplishment, my proof that sometimes the most broken things can be fixed with patience and love. The shop is yours not because you're my heir, but because you're the only one who understands that fixing things is about more than just the machinery. Live your life, sweetheart. Go back to medical school if that's what makes you happy, or keep the shop if you want to carry on what we built together. Whatever you choose, know that I'm proud of you and I love you, and nothing, not death, not doubt, not cruel words from people who never understood us, can ever change that. You are Rachel Morrison, and you are exactly where you belong. Love always, Dad. P.S. There's one more surprise in that safety deposit box. Trust me, you're going to need it for what comes next. By the time I finished reading, tears were streaming down my face, but they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of relief, of vindication, of coming home to myself after years of doubt. Patricia and Jessica were still arguing with Mr. Morrison about the legality of the will, but their voices faded into background noise. I stood up, clutching the letter and the key, and walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Patricia demanded. "We're not finished here?" Quote. I turned back to face them both, this woman who had spent 15 years making me feel unwelcome in my own home, and her daughter who had inherited that same cold cruelty. "Yes, we are," I said quietly. "We're very much finished." And for the first time in my adult life, I walked away from them without apologizing for taking up space. The drive to First National Bank felt like floating. Everything looked different. The familiar streets of Cedar Falls, the courthouse where Dad had testified in custody hearings I'd never known about, the diner where he'd taken me for milkshakes after particularly hard days. This wasn't just the town where I'd grown up. This was the town where my father had fought to bring me home. Box 247 was larger than I'd expected. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, were treasures I'd never known existed. A silver locket with a photo of a young woman who looked exactly like me, letters written in my mother's delicate handwriting before her illness took hold, and a birth certificate that listed Robert Morrison as my father and Sarah Elizabeth Morrison as my mother. But it was the letter Dad had written when I was 5 that broke me open completely. Today, my little girl asked me if I was really her daddy, and I realized that I've been so afraid of losing her again that I forgot to make sure she knew she was safe. She's safe now, she's home, she's mine, and I'm hers, and nothing in this world will ever change that. Sarah, if you're watching from somewhere, know that our daughter is loved beyond measure. She's going to be extraordinary. At the bottom of the box was a manila envelope marked, "For Rachel's future." Inside were stock certificates, bonds, and bank statements I'd never known about. Dad had been quietly investing in my future for years, building a nest egg that would ensure I never had to depend on anyone ever again. The total was staggering, nearly $500,000 in various accounts and investments, all in my name. But the real surprise was at the very bottom, a business plan, written in Dad's careful handwriting titled Morrison Medical Clinic, Bringing Healthcare to Cedar Falls. He'd spent the last year of his life researching what it would take to help me open my own family practice in our hometown. Market analysis, financial projections, potential locations. Everything I'd need to combine my medical training with my love for our community. On the last page, he'd written, "For the girl who fixes people the same way she learned to fix engines, with patience, skill, and love." I sat in that sterile bank vault and cried for 20 minutes. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that even while dying, my father had been planning for my happiness. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of legal paperwork and life-changing decisions. I officially inherited the house and the auto shop, moved back into my childhood bedroom, and began the process of figuring out what came next. Patricia and Jessica moved out within a week, taking only what the will had specifically granted them. They left behind a house that finally felt like home again. No more walking on eggshells, no more pretending I didn't notice their whispered conversations, no more feeling like a guest in my own life. I spent my days going through Dad's things, learning about the business he'd built, and reading every letter my biological mother had written before her illness consumed her. Sarah Morrison had been an elementary school teacher who loved poetry and gardening, and dreamed of raising a daughter who would be brave enough to chase her dreams and kind enough to help others chase theirs. She would have been proud of what I'd become. They both would have been. The auto shop was thriving under the management of Dad's longtime employee, Marcus Thompson, a 45-year-old mechanic who'd worked alongside Dad for over a decade. He was relieved when I told him I wanted him to keep running the day-to-day operations. "Your dad always said you had other dreams," Marcus told me as we walked through the garage together. "But he also said you understood what this place meant to people. It's not just about fixing cars. It's about taking care of neighbors." That's when I made my decision. I called Northwestern's medical school and arranged to complete my residency part-time over the next 3 years, while establishing a family practice in Cedar Falls. Dad's business plan became my roadmap, and his investment accounts became my startup capital. Morrison Medical Clinic opened 6 months later in a renovated building 3 blocks from the auto shop. I kept my maiden name, Morrison, as a tribute to the man who'd given me everything and the mother I'd never known but carried in my heart. The clinic was everything Dad had envisioned: affordable health care for working families, evening hours for people who couldn't take time off during the day, and a sliding scale payment system for those struggling financially. I hired 2 nurse practitioners and a part-time therapist, creating the kind of comprehensive care our small town had never had access to. Life was good. Better than good. It was purposeful. And then, on a cold February morning almost a year after Dad's death, my phone rang. "Rachel? It's Patricia." I hadn't heard her voice since the day we'd left the lawyer's office. The sound of it made my stomach clench with old familiar anxiety. "Patricia, what do you want?" We need to talk. Jessica is in trouble. Real trouble." I waited, saying nothing. "She's been arrested. Embezzlement from her employer, a big real estate firm in Des Moines. They're saying she stole nearly $200,000 over 2 years. She's looking at prison time, Rachel. Real prison time." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I didn't wish genuine harm on Jessica. "The lawyers want $50,000 just for the retainer. I've used up all the money Robert left me, and the college fund won't cover legal fees and restitution. We've sold everything we can sell." I knew what was coming next. "Rachel, I know we haven't always gotten along, but Jessica is your sister. Half-sister, but still family. Your father would want you to help her." The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. "My father," I said carefully, "made his feelings about Jessica very clear in his will." "That was different?" He was angry, probably medicated. "He didn't mean those things he wrote. You know Robert wasn't a cruel man." "You're right, he wasn't cruel, which is why he left Jessica her college fund, and his most prized possession, instead of leaving her nothing at all." Patricia's voice took on that wheedling tone I remembered from childhood. "Rachel, please. I'm begging you. We have nowhere else to turn. You have so much now. The house, the business, all that money. You could help us and never even miss it." "Like you never missed an opportunity to make me feel unwelcome in my own home?" She sighed. "I know I wasn't always warm to you, but I was protecting my daughter. Any mother would have done the same." "Protecting her from what? From having a sister who loved her father?" Quote. "You don't understand what it was like," Patricia snapped, her composure finally cracking. "You were Robert's whole world. Jessica and I were just extras in your story. Do you know how hard it is to compete with a dead woman's memory and her perfect daughter?" The honesty was startling, even if it came 20 years too late. "I was never perfect," I said quietly. I was just a kid who wanted her family to love her. Well, now we need that family to help us. I closed my eyes, thinking about Dad's letters, about the years of cruel comments and cold shoulders, about Jessica's words at the funeral. I'll think about it, I said finally. Rachel, thank you. I knew you'd. I said, I'll think about it, that's all. I hung up before she could say anything else. That night, I sat in Dad's old chair in the living room, holding the letter he'd written about 5-year-old me and trying to figure out what the right thing to do was. Jessica had been cruel, yes, but she'd also been a child raised by a mother who taught her that love was a competition and that I was the enemy. Patricia had been cold and manipulative, but she'd also been a woman who felt like she was living in another woman's shadow. None of that excused their behavior, but it did complicate my feelings about letting Jessica face the consequences alone. I thought about what Dad would want me to do, not what he'd written in anger while dying, but what the man who taught me to fix broken things would want. The man who'd searched for 2 years to bring his lost daughter home. The man who'd married a woman he didn't love because he thought her child needed a father. The man who'd forgiven my mother's illness and treasured her memory despite the pain she'd caused. By morning, I'd made my decision. I agreed to meet Patricia and Jessica at a coffee shop in Des Moines, neutral territory, where none of us had the advantage of familiar surroundings. The drive took 2 hours, giving me plenty of time to rehearse what I wanted to say. They were already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with their hands wrapped around coffee cups like they were seeking warmth. Jessica looked terrible, hollow-eyed and thin, her usual polished appearance replaced by the desperate look of someone watching their life fall apart. Patricia stood when she saw me, her face flooding with relief. Rachel, thank you for coming. I knew you'd... Sit down, I said quietly, both of you. They sat. I remained standing, looking down at them both. For the first time in my life, I was the one with power in this relationship, and I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Before we talk about money, I said, I want to know something. Jessica, do you remember what you said to me at Dad's funeral? Jessica's face flushed red. I was upset. People say things when they're grieving. Do you remember what you said? She looked away. I said you were adopted, so you didn't count. And that you were Dad's charity case. The words came out in a whisper. Look at me when you're talking, I said, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. Jessica raised her eyes to mine. I saw fear there, and shame, and something that might have been genuine remorse. Now I want you to tell me why you said it. I don't know. I was angry and sad and... Try again. Jessica's composure cracked. Because I was jealous, okay? Because even at his funeral, everything was still about you. You gave the eulogy, everyone was talking about how devoted you were, how you'd given up medical school to take care of him, and I wanted to hurt you the way you'd been hurting me for 15 years. How had I been hurting you? By being perfect, the words exploded out of her. By being everything he wanted in a daughter while I was just... there. Do you know what it's like to grow up in the shadow of someone who can do no wrong? Someone your stepfather loves more than his own wife's child? I stared at her for a long moment. Yes, Jessica, I do know what that's like. Because I grew up in the shadow of his biological daughter, the one who belonged there by right, while I was just the charity case he took pity on. But that wasn't true, Patricia interjected. You were his real daughter. I didn't know that then, I said sharply. For 27 years, I believed exactly what you wanted me to believe, that I was lucky to be tolerated, that I should be grateful for scraps of affection, that I would never really belong. I sat down across from them, leaning forward. Do you want to know what those years were like for me? Watching you two whisper and laugh together while I sat alone at the dinner table. Having Jessica accidentally break my things and watching Patricia blame me for being careless. Hearing you tell Dad I was going through a phase every time I accomplished something worth celebrating. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. I was trying to protect my daughter. Quote, from what? From having a sister who would have loved her if she'd been given half a chance? From being replaced, Patricia admitted. Robert talked about you constantly. Rachel this, Rachel that, even before we were married. I knew I'd never be as important to him as you were. So you decided to make sure I knew I wasn't important to you. I was wrong, Patricia said, and for the first time her voice sounded genuinely broken. I was scared and petty and wrong, and I turned my own daughter into someone I don't recognize. Jessica was crying now, ugly tears that made her mascara run in dark streams down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry, Rachel. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I spent so many years hating you for something that wasn't even your fault, and now I've destroyed my own life, and I don't know how to fix any of it. I reached into my purse and pulled out a check I'd written that morning. I placed it on the table between us. They both stared at it. $75,000, made out to Jessica Morrison. This is not forgiveness, I said clearly. This is mercy. There's a difference. Jessica picked up the check with shaking hands. Rachel, thank you. I don't deserve this. No, you don't. But Dad taught me that we don't help people because they deserve it. We help them because it's the right thing to do. I stood up to leave, then turned back. There are conditions. First, you get counseling, real therapy, not just anger management classes to satisfy the court. You figure out why you've spent your life tearing other people down to build yourself up. Jessica nodded eagerly. Second, you stay away from me, both of you. Don't call, don't visit, don't show up at my clinic or my home. I'm done being your family scapegoat, and I'm done pretending we're something we're not. Patricia looked stricken. But Rachel, we could start over. We could try to be a real family now that what? Now that I have money? Now that you need something from me? I shook my head. You had 15 years to be my family. You chose not to be. I'm not interested in auditioning for your love anymore. I picked up my purse and car keys. The money comes with one more condition. If either of you ever speaks my name in public, if you ever try to claim credit for my success or paint yourselves as victims of my cruelty, I'll sue you for defamation and I'll win. I have excellent lawyers now. Quote. Jessica was still staring at the check like she couldn't believe it was real. Why? She asked finally. Why are you helping me after everything I did to you? I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd spent half her life making me feel small, who'd tried to poison my last moments with my father, who'd never once treated me like family until she needed me to act like it. Because, I said quietly, someone has to break the cycle. Dad taught me that broken things can be fixed with patience and love. Maybe there's still something in you worth fixing, but you're gonna have to do the work yourself. I walked out of that coffee shop and didn't look back. The drive home was peaceful. I rolled down the windows despite the February cold and let the wind blow through my hair. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free, not from responsibility or consequence, but from the need to earn love from people who were never going to give it freely. I had chosen mercy over revenge, but I had also chosen my own peace over their comfort. Dad would have been proud of both decisions. That was 3 years ago. Jessica used the money to hire a good lawyer and make partial restitution. She served 18 months in minimum security prison and got out last spring. I heard through small-town gossip that she's working as a bookkeeper for a veterinary clinic in Iowa City and living quietly with a roommate. Patricia moved to Phoenix to be closer to her sister. She sent me a Christmas card last year with a note that said simply, "Thank you for giving my daughter a second chance. I hope someday you can give me one too." I kept the card, but I didn't respond. Some wounds heal, but that doesn't mean you have to keep reopening them. As for me, I've built something beautiful here in Cedar Falls. Morrison Medical Clinic now serves over 3,000 patients across 3 counties. We've expanded to include mental health services, prenatal care, and a small urgent care facility. I completed my residency and opened a second location in the next town over. Marcus still runs Morrison's Auto Repair, and we've started a unique partnership. Patients who can't afford their medical bills can work off their debt doing light maintenance work at the shop. It's exactly the kind of creative community solution Dad would have loved. I never married, but I did fall in love with Dr. Michael Chen, a pediatrician who moved to Cedar Falls 2 years ago to escape the burnout of big city medicine. He understands my commitment to this community and shares my belief that healthcare should be about healing people, not just treating symptoms. We're planning our wedding for next summer in the backyard of the house Dad left me, the house where I learned that family isn't about blood or adoption papers or legal definitions. It's about the people who choose to love you when you're at your worst, who celebrate your victories without jealousy, and who show up when it matters most. I keep Dad's last letter framed on my office wall, next to my medical degree, and a photo of the three of us, me, Dad, and my mother Sarah, that I found in her jewelry box. In the photo, I'm maybe 6 months old, and they're both looking at me like I'm the most miraculous thing they've ever seen. Because that's what love looks like. Not perfect, not always easy, but unwavering. Last month, I got a letter from a young woman in Nebraska. Her name is Katie, and she's 23 years old. She found my clinic's website and noticed my story about being adopted by my biological father. She wrote to tell me that she's been in foster care since she was 5, bouncing between homes, never feeling like she belonged anywhere. Reading about your dad, she wrote, made me realize that family isn't about being born into the right circumstances. It's about finding people who see your worth, even when you can't see it yourself. Maybe I'll never have what you had, but at least now I know what to look for. I wrote her back immediately. We've been corresponding for months now, and I've learned that she's studying nursing at the University of Nebraska with dreams of working in rural healthcare. She's brilliant, determined, and has that same stubborn streak Dad always said I inherited from my mother. Next week, Katie is driving down to Cedar Falls to visit the clinic and shadow me for a few days. She doesn't know it yet, but I've already set up a scholarship fund in Dad's name that will cover the rest of her nursing school expenses. Because that's what you do when you've been given the gift of unconditional love. You pass it forward to someone who needs it. Some people might say I'm naive for helping Jessica, or foolish for trusting a stranger I met through letters. They might say that the blood family should come first, or that I should be more careful with the inheritance Dad worked so hard to build. But here's what I've learned about family, about love, and about the difference between the two. Real family doesn't make you earn your place at the table. They don't keep score of your mistakes or hold your differences against you. They don't love you because they have to. They love you because they choose to, every single day, even when it's hard. Love isn't about genetics or legal documents or who shares your last name. It's about who shows up when you're sick, who believes in your dreams even when they don't understand them, and who fights for you when you're too tired to fight for yourself. Dad wasn't perfect. He kept secrets that probably should have been shared sooner, and he married a woman who made our home feel like a battlefield for 15 years. But he never stopped choosing me, even when it would have been easier to give up. When I was 5 years old and came home crying because a boy said I didn't look like my father, Dad could have explained genetics and adoption and the complicated circumstances of my early life. Instead, he sat me on his lap and said, "Rachel, some families are born and some families are built. Ours was built with love and stubbornness and a lot of late nights in the garage. That makes it just as real as any other family, and don't let anyone tell you different." It took me 22 more years to understand what he meant, but now I do. Family is what you make it. Love is what you choose. And belonging isn't something you're born into, it's something you create, one act of kindness at a time. I think about Patricia and Jessica sometimes, wondering if they've learned the same lessons I have. I hope Jessica is finding peace in her new life, and I hope Patricia has stopped trying to compete with ghosts. I hope they've both learned that love isn't a finite resource. There's always enough to go around if you're willing to share it freely. But whether they have or not, that's their journey to take. Mine led me home to myself, to the truth about where I come from, and to the understanding that I am exactly where I belong. In 2 weeks, Michael and I are planning to start the adoption process. Not because we can't have biological children, but because there are children out there who need families, and we have love to give. Dad would have liked that symmetry. The adopted daughter who grew up to adopt children of her own, continuing the cycle of chosen family and unconditional love. Yesterday, I was going through Dad's old desk and found one more letter I'd missed. This one was addressed to my future children, sealed and dated the week before he died. "To the children Rachel will love someday," it began, "let me tell you about your mother. She is the strongest person I know, not because she never breaks, but because she always finds a way to put herself back together. She is kind without being weak, generous without being foolish, and brave enough to love people even when they haven't earned it. She learned these things from her biological mother, who loved her fiercely even through her illness, and from me, who tried every day to be worthy of the gift of raising her. But mostly, she learned them from herself, from choosing again and again to see the best in people and situations, even when it would be easier to give up. Love her well, little ones. Let her teach you about fixing broken things and building something beautiful from the pieces. And remember that family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up for each other, especially when it's hard. Your grandfather, who never got to meet you but loves you already. I cried reading that letter, but they were good tears. The kind that come when you realize your story isn't ending. It's just beginning a new chapter. So if you're listening to this and you've ever felt like you don't belong, if you've ever been told that your love doesn't count because of circumstances beyond your control, if you've ever wondered whether you're worthy of the family you've built or found or chosen, let me tell you what my dad taught me. You are exactly where you're supposed to be. The people who truly love you don't need you to be perfect. They just need you to be you. And sometimes, the family that matters most isn't the one you're born into, but the one you're brave enough to create. Blood may be thicker than water, but love is thicker than blood. And love, real, chosen, intentional love, that's what lasts. That's what builds legacies. That's what changes the world, one act of grace at a time. 3 years ago, I thought I'd lost everything when my father died and my family showed their true colors. But it turns out I didn't lose anything. I just finally saw clearly what I'd always had and what I'd never really lost. I had a father who loved me unconditionally, a mother whose memory lived on in my heart, and the strength to build my own definition of family. Everything else was just noise. And now, standing in the house where I learned what love looks like, preparing to pass that same unconditional acceptance to the next generation, I can say with absolute certainty, I am Rachel Morrison. I am my father's daughter. I am my mother's legacy. I am exactly who I was meant to be. And I am home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.